Good evening. Welcome to our December 4th Executive Committee meeting. We have a relatively short agenda tonight. First item on the agenda is the discussion of the 120-day language in the Superintendent Contract. And my name's by that. And Dr. Aguilar, we are approaching the end of your current contract terms. And we have a requirement as a board to, I don't have the contract in front of me, but basically the language says that we need to decide on and negotiate a contract extension if that's your intent. If we don't do it by 120 days out, it says that we shall negotiate a contract with you. And it appears to me that we're, as a board, in a better position if we negotiate that contract before we shall negotiate it. Because once we shall negotiate it, we have a lot less options with regards to negotiation. So, if we intend to do that, I'm not asking you right now to commit one way or the other. I know that retirement is an option for you, and with the retirement formulas, there's not much financial benefit to continuing to serve as our superintendent, but I know that you would do it for free if you could. So, with that, I just wanted to bring it up, and if you had any discussions you want to do now with us now, or we can just maybe set up a time to meet later, it's up to you.
Absolutely. What I think we should do is maybe sit down, you and I, with a small number of board members, and discuss and see if there's some common ground.
All right. How's next week?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, we'll set up a time next week. Do you guys have any other comments or questions on that? All right, the next item on the agenda we're going to push to the end of the meeting. We're going to go over 2.3 now, grievance policy and procedures. Mr. Craig or Ms. Thibodeaux?
Actually, I had asked that this be put on there. There were just several issues with the related policies. I'm not asking for any action. I just want to kind of point these things out to Dr. Aguilar and his staff to see if we can start the process of maybe tightening all of these things up and having a better understanding. So before I start with my comments, I want to make a couple of statements. One is that, yes, I know that under the various laws in Act 1, the superintendent has significant discretion with regards to employee matters. But our primary responsibility is to set school board policy. So, of course, the superintendent's discretion should align with the policies and the intent behind the policies and any applicable law. And then our Vision 2020, you know, the primary purpose of that is student learning, achievement, and success. So it's very student focused. So we have to keep that in mind. Right. So, and both of my fellow board members here are familiar with this kind of phenomena. When there's a particular type of issue, word will get around to the community or to staff or employees, and then they will start contacting that particular board member every time there's an issue, regardless of where they live in the district. Okay. So that's been the case with me. Apparently my name has gotten out there whenever there's some issues or concerns or disagreement with various types of employment matters, primarily arising under the grievance policy, what is a grievance, but also with dealings with the HR department. So I'm certainly not here today to attack the HR department, but I think that we need to talk about these various matters so that they can be addressed in kind of a universal or uniform matter. Right. So some of the issues that I've gotten through various communications are there are frequent Facebook posts. And look, I'm not saying that any of these things are true or correct or not. They could just be, they could be false, they could be opinion, but they're out there. And the Facebook strings will talk about how this employee did this, but they're being allowed to stay there. They're not being disciplined, or this employee was treated one way and another employee was treated differently. Low morale, frustration from the principals that their recommendations for employee action are being ignored or discounted or disregarded. So it's, at least my appreciation, is that some of the principals at least are feeling like their input doesn't count for anything, because they can spend a lot of time collecting documents, evidence, proof of an employee's conduct or misconduct. It goes up the line, and then a decision is made somewhere that, yeah, that's not that bad, we're going to leave them there. And so it takes a lot of work and effort and energy for a principal or an administrator to do that type of thing. It's not easy, but there just seems to be a lot of discontent or malcontent about the various processes. I've gotten several comments about contacting the HR department, people getting inconsistent information from HR. Some people have complained about rudeness from the HR department. I have no idea who they're talking to. There's been comments or concerns that there's some worry that decisions or actions are not being taken because there's a fear of litigation against the school board. And look, these are all things that have existed for a very long time. But because of the number of communications I've been getting over the past few months, I did ask your staff, Dr. Aguilar, to pull several of the related policies. The agenda item talks about GAE and the investigation policy, GMAC. Those are the two primary ones. But there are others that are related. GBRA, which is employee conduct, GBE, personnel assignment, GBM, personnel transfer, GAK, the Personnel File Act, and then GBK, the Employee Discipline Policy. And I'm not going to go through all of those tonight, but I just wanted to point out some of the issues. As most people know, before I became a board member, I was an attorney and I represented the board for a number of years. I'm familiar with these policies. They've been revised or amended somewhat since I was representing the board. Even as an attorney familiar with the policies, these policies are difficult to understand in many respects, or they're somewhat vague, and it's not necessarily easy to understand which policy applies in that particular case. There's also not a very consistent reference from one policy to another to let employees or teachers or staff know, okay, I'm not sure if this is a grievance or a complaint or an investigation, so where do I go? And so when they call the HR department and they say, well, you have to file a grievance, then they think that's what they have to do, even if it's not really a grievance. And so there's a real disconnect between the various issues that happen on a day-to-day, hopefully not day-to-day basis at the individual schools and with individual people, and how the policies are being carried out. And so I think that we really need to tighten that up. Sorry, I typed up notes and then my printer didn't work, so I have them on my phone. One of the other issues is, and maybe Dr. Aguilar, you may be able to answer this right now, several of these policies indicate that the superintendent or his designee can take certain actions. So who's your designee, or who are your designees for these various employment actions? Do you have these written down? Is it one person? Is it Joe, Ms. Trosclair, Mr. Craig, and Ms. Thibodeaux? Or, I mean, how does that work? And how do people know who your designee is?
So I'm not sure I understand your question. Most everything that comes out of the HR department, if it's a recommendation to hire an individual or a recommendation to administer discipline as needed or recommended action to terminate, the memo comes to my office.
Okay.
And so I don't designate that authority to sign those documents unless I'm on annual leave or out of the office for a professional meeting. Normally the policies are written where it says the principal or their designee. In that case, it would be the principal who would designate to the assistant principal to do certain functions. However, the principal is ultimately responsible. The superintendent might designate to the entire HR department the process of administering human resources, but ultimately I'm responsible.
Right, and I agree with that. But many of the policies that I listed, for example, GBK, employee discipline, says the superintendent and his or her designee shall possess the authority to discipline employees.
I haven't given that to anyone else.
Okay. And then investigations, which is different in some respects from grievances and complaints, says the same thing, that you're designee. And there are situations that I know of.
So in the case of an investigation, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Kathy Aloisio might investigate a complaint or investigate something at an elementary school. Brian Hebert would do the same for a middle or high school. Joe Craig, Irma Trosclair might investigate an incident. Ultimately, it would come back to my office if discipline was needed.
Okay. Do those, let's say for instance there's a situation that's being investigated and maybe it's under Ms. Trosclair's umbrella. So the principal investigates it, then Beverly or Brian investigate it, then they bring it to their supervisor, Ms. Trosclair or Mr. Craig, then they make a recommendation to you. Is HR involved in that somewhere in the middle? Do they take over after the assistant superintendent makes the recommendation?
They would be involved if the employees would be issued a letter of reprimand or a letter of suspension or a termination letter. But let me make it crystal clear that Kathy and Brian and Joe and Billy Guidry and others investigate matters. Sometimes it never comes to my office because the matter is investigated, there's an outcome, and people are satisfied, and we move on without notifying me of each and every time there's an investigation or a complaint.
Okay. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, again, those policies I've listed, almost every single one of them talks about you or your designee, and many of the communications that I've received deal with that. It'll be something where maybe on this particular occasion it was this person, and on another occasion it was another person, and there just seems to be a lot of blurriness. And so if I'm the employee being investigated and I go to find the policies, and I'm like, okay, well, which of these policies applies, and is it this one or that one, and who's the designee, and who's really investigating me, and do they have the right to say that, or am I allowed to go here or there? And it, you know,
so normally
we have to look at that.
If it happens at a school, the principal might be the person charged with conducting the investigation. If someone is dissatisfied with the principal's recommendation, they might appeal that to the directors of schools, and if they're still unhappy about the outcome, might appeal that to Joe Craig's office. We need to have a layer of checks and balances so that people are not immediately coming to my office, because at that point, if they're not happy with my decision, it'll come to the board.
Right, and I don't think everyone should come straight to your office. I do agree there should be layers, but the layers should be consistent and transparent. And I'm not sure that the way our policies, and look, I understand that some of our policies have been prepared by forethought and they're kind of uniform policies, but I think we can do a better job of being more transparent for our staff and our employees and our teachers on how the process, and one of the examples is that let's say that there are several teachers and staffs of a school who just have complaints about the general operations of the school. Okay, it's not a finite complaint. It's just all hell is breaking loose here, and we need somebody. That's not a grievance. It's not really a complaint, because a complaint is sort of the precursor to a grievance. And so how do those people know where to go, and how do they report it? And if they want an investigation, the investigation policy doesn't say you need to go here, you need to go there, or you need to do this writing. There's no way to know how to get that started, but it's important for us as a system to know that if there's a school-wide problem or an ongoing issue, but our policy doesn't really address that plainly or clearly, and so I think a lot of things may end up falling through the cracks. Or, and again, I don't know the validity or veracity of the comments that I've received from people, but let's say that there is a group of teachers or staff somewhere and they call HR, and HR says, well, the first thing you've got to do is go to your principal, and they say, well, we don't want to do that because we have some concerns and she's part of the problem, we think. Well, you've got to go. That's what the policy says. Well, does it? Does that policy even apply? But that's what they're being told, and so they have to then go there. And then they say, well, we're not doing anything because you didn't follow the grievance policy. And so those kind of things can easily fall through the cracks, and nothing is getting addressed, and it's just an ongoing problem that's escalating. And it really causes a bad spot for the teachers at the school who want something to change. Maybe it needs to be changed, maybe it doesn't, but we need to do something to make sure that it's being addressed, and that that they're not being cut off at the knees by being told when they call HR, oh, that's grievance, you got to follow grievance. The other issue, and I've brought this up with you before, is that none of these policies address the situation where if I have a grievance against my supervisor, when I go and file my first complaint, what the policy says is you've got to take it to your supervisor. But if that's the person I'm complaining about, I may be unwilling to go to them because I'm going to be worried about retaliation of some sort if I go to my principal and say, I have a grievance against you because you did this. But that's what our policy says, and there's no language in these policies that says, if the person you have a grievance against is your supervisor, then you should take it to this person instead. And that's typical, but it's not what our policy says. And so I think that there's a lot of chilling effects in the way our policies are currently written that are not conducive to a good, positive, strong morale of our teachers and our staff. And so I think that we really need to take a good look at what we can do to make all of this, one, more easy to understand, to define the difference between a grievance, a complaint, when an investigation is appropriate, and how to initiate an investigation, or at least to initiate a petition for an investigation. I don't know what the right language would be. And just to make sure that we're having a consistent follow through and the consistent messaging. And I would strongly suggest or encourage that there be some type of guideline that's posted online that's easy to find, that just spells this out in much simpler terms. If you have a grievance against a particular person, look at policy blank. If you have this, look at policy blank. I mean, I think that it's just difficult for somebody. Besides the fact it's not easy to even access our policies on board docs. It can be a little bit difficult to find what you need. And then my one last comment, and this is maybe something for our attorney to take a look at as well. When I was looking through these various policies, we have a GAK, which is the Personnel File Act, that gives individuals 15 days to file a rebuttal. But then we have some different employee discipline policies that give employees only 7 days to respond. They don't call it a rebuttal, but it's basically a rebuttal that gives them only 7 days, and that's inconsistent with the other policy that gives them 15, which is actually tracking language from a very particular statute. So again, it's confusing. It's like, do they have 7 days? Have there been people who didn't file their rebuttal in 7 days under this policy that have been I don't know, kicked out or had something happen to them, even though the law actually gives them 15 days under the Personnel File Act? So there's just a lot of inconsistencies here, and I think that we need to really just tighten those up, make sure I'm only talking about this in the context of our staff and teachers and employees, but I could just as well talk about the same types of issues for complaints by our community and our parents and our teachers. It's a different set of policies, but there's the same type of confusion with that. So I'm just asking, I'm not asking for any action, but I would just like you and your team to maybe figure out the best way to look at this, and I would strongly encourage, of course, having the teachers or the teacher association involved in the process.
Sure. And just a couple of comments. There may be some confusion between a grievance, which is an appeal of the application of a policy or a procedure. So it really needs to go to the immediate supervisor, and there should not be any retaliation. We have rules and regulations to prohibit people from being retaliated against. So if the principal or the assistant principal misapplied a rule or a policy, then that's the grievance procedure. It goes to the immediate supervisor, and then it goes up the chain of command, ultimately, finally, to the board if necessary. Complaints are a completely different matter, and I agree we can easily create a document that illustrates the correct path to follow so that all events can be investigated.
Right, but here's part of the confusion, Dr. Aguilar. If you look at policy GAE, which is the complaint and grievance policy, It has that first section, the introductory section, which says what you just said, that it should be if you don't like how a policy or procedure was applied or interpreted as to you, then you file a grievance. Then there's another paragraph that says complaint, and it doesn't define what a complaint is, but it just says every effort should be made to resolve a complaint before initiating a grievance. The supervisor and employee may meet, doesn't require that they meet, but they may meet to discuss it. If the complaint cannot be resolved, then they have to follow a grievance. So under this policy, the way it's written, a complaint is just a precursor to the whole grievance procedure. So that may be part of the confusion. If a complaint is not a grievance,
maybe that's the root of the confusion, okay, and we can clean that up and make some recommendations.
But I do think we need to also look. We don't want to get complaints. In an optimal or ideal world, we would get no complaints about anything, but that's not going to happen. But we need to make sure that we want people to give us their complaints so we can make sure that there's no substance to them or that they're being addressed, because sometimes the complaints really do have good substance, and we shouldn't be kicking them out because somebody's interpretation is, well, that's a grievance and you didn't follow it, so we're not dealing with it. You know, that's like form over function, and we need to make sure that we are dealing with issues within our system, especially when they affect the education of our kids. So if I'm just going to ask you at this point,
yes,
informally, if you can kind of get your staff to kind of tighten all of those things up and make it much more transparent to the people who need to use those policies when they have a grievance or a complaint or need to initiate an investigation, which I think is a third category, because the policies are different, the process is different. So anyway, that's what I wanted to address today.
Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to ask Ms. Morris, any complaints she gets about our department, if she would let Dr. Aguilar know. We meet with every person that has come through, no matter how busy. Any specific situation where we've put off anybody, I'd like to know, because my door is always open. Mr. Deed as well. So please, I can't really address generalities, but I can certainly tell you that that's not our intent. And I'll be happy to meet with anybody every complaint that comes through my desk is always discuss it with the superintendent and follow his lead on investigating it, or delegating, or he will delegate someone else to investigate. We don't put off any complaints; they're handled. So, but if it's a specific situation, we want to address the person, so please, but we can't if we don't know, so please let the superintendent know so he can get with me and we can handle the situation.
All right, Dr. Aguilar, the next item on the agenda is access to board policies. Mr. Craig?
I think I'd asked him to put this on the agenda as well. It's just very brief, and it kind of builds off of what I just said. When I was trying to print these policies myself and went to board docs, one, it's not easy. Some of the policy designations are highlighted, some are not. I've been told that maybe the ones that are not highlighted are policies that are not even in existence, but they're still being listed under our board doc policies, which is confusing. The other issue, and maybe this is a board docs issue, is you have to kind of jump through some hoops just to print the policy. This is just simple access to the policy. So it just makes it difficult for people who are not familiar with how it works, and we want people to be very familiar. The other problem is it seems to take a good bit of time. Once we adopt a new policy, it seems to take a while for the new policy to be made available online, and so I don't understand what the holdup is with that. So
Ms. Morris, I spoke to Jim Prescott personally, and board members, it takes about 4 months from the time a school board adopts a policy to the revised CAPS, which is the online version of the document. There is no faster mechanism that we can expect as long as we stay with board docs. Now, we do have a mechanism. Mona, would you be kind enough just to show and share with the board the process we've used, because we have the CAPS program that has all of the approved policies. Now, within the CAPS program, they reference certain policies that we don't have as a district, and that's not going to be cleaned up by Forethought Consulting. Once you approve a policy, it will be placed immediately in a location where employees can see the adopted policy and the language. So Mona, can you bring that up on the screen?
And along those lines, Dr. Aguillard, it seems then that we need to have a statement somewhere that when you go into CAPS, it says if the designation is not highlighted or does not go to a link, it is not a policy of the Lafayette Parish School Board. I didn't know that, and I'm on the board. So if a mom's sitting at home and they want to find the policy on whatever.
And when they click on that code for that policy, there's nothing attached to it. There's no attachment to it. But you are correct. We could clean up the language there.
So what Blaine Beer did for us is put a link on Board Docs. So if I click on Board Docs, let's enter the public site. We have recently revised, adopted, eliminated policies. You click on that and you're going to find those that have been acted on by the board but have not yet been put into Board Docs. Let me see what else. Yeah, whether you log on with your ID or you enter the public, you'll have recently revised, adopted, or eliminated policies. Policies in review is a list of policies, just as it says, which are currently being reviewed by council and considered for adoption.
So what's the difference between recently revised and adopted?
The board's already acted on those, but they're not on CAPS yet.
But a policy revised is adopted, correct? I mean,
Yes.
if we've acted on it.
Yes.
So they're the same thing.
Well, the policies in review have not been acted on yet.
No, but you showed, I thought it was adopted and then revised.
No, it's all,
There's two categories. There's an adopted, if you go to that link, there's an adopted policies, and then there's a second category of revised policies.
Is new? As in, it's never been here before. Does it matter? I mean, a policy, once it's adopted, whether it's new or old, and revised is policy.
yeah.
But they're all adopted. So does there have to be a designation between the two?
No.
I think that
Not
adds
if
to
you think
confusion.
it's, oh, wait, Caleb's saying yes. Caleb's point is that if it's revised, they know that there's one already on CAPS, and they could look at the old versus the new. But
public, I don't know why, but that you adopted policy in August. I know myself, that I know that you revised it in August, and I go get on the CAPS, and I'm like, where is it? And I call her sometimes, and I go, what's taking so long? And I know it's Forethought, it's not just here, it's everywhere. It's every school district. That's how long they take to put an update. So this is what you guys have done here to get them in a place that everybody can see them for as long as it takes until they actually get onto the CAP system. All the ones, if you adopt policies tomorrow or revisions, they'll put them on here, Thursday or Friday, so that they're available somewhere in the meantime.
My question is it important to be able to delineate between revised and new? It is important? Okay. If it's important, it's important. Thank you.
All right, and just to kind of add to this as well, from time to time, the full board will ask staff to create guidelines for particular issues, because those are, again, letting people know how a policy is going to be interpreted or applied. I think that the guidelines should be available as well as the policies, and I also think, maybe they are, but I don't know where they are on the website. I think that all of the job descriptions that the board adopts they need to be made public and posted as well, because there are many times when I want to know, well, what is the job description for that position? And it's a policy. It's something that we adopt as a board. It's one of our primary responsibilities, and they should be posted for everyone to see. So.
And they are. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of job descriptions. They are posted. Now, could we put them in a more easily retrievable location, perhaps?
Okay, where are they on the website? I'm on board docs.
If you go to employment and faculty, go to our website and go to employment and faculty. On the right, there's a drop down that says job descriptions. You click on there. And
that's all of them, and that's all the updated ones? So how quick is your turnaround for getting those on?
Well, as soon as I get, when you pass the job description, I go in the next morning and email it to Caleb or Aaron and ask them to put it up. And so it's usually put up pretty.
All right, well, I'll spend some time exploring that tomorrow, because if it's difficult for me to get around, then it's probably that much more difficult for the average person to find it. So, okay.
Yes, ma'am. And Ms. Morris, we have started a practice of, once policies are adopted, we will email them to all employees as well.
Yeah, I saw that recently, and that was good. So we just need to make sure. But then, that doesn't help the members of the public. For example, the volunteer policy was a big one, and it was affecting members of the community right then and there while we were discussing it. It's not posted yet, and I don't know, is it still in review even, maybe? I'm not even sure. But the public who needs to know, do I need to go get fingerprinted or not? They can't see it.
It's definitely not in caps yet.
So, okay, thank you.
All right, the next and the final item on tonight's agenda is the proposed interpreter job descriptions. And who is, Thibodeaux, is this for you?
I'll give a little bit of background if that's okay, Ms. Thibodeaux. So for some time there's been a move to create some updated job descriptions for our interpreters, and we have, what, 20 interpreters? 22 in the district, and we provide services to other students from other parishes as well. So there's just been some frustration, I understand, in the whole process of how the job description, the creation of the job description. I happened to be in a coffee shop with my daughter, and there was a group of interpreters there talking, and I said, okay, I'm going to turn around and identify myself before they start bashing the board too badly. And so I kind of got involved with that, and my understanding, and I may be putting words in your collective mouth, is just that there's a lot of frustration, and the interpreters want the opportunity to tell us what their frustration is, what it is they want with the job descriptions, and kind of where we're going. And there are some draft job descriptions, and I think there are some issues with them. So, but I'll let them speak on that.
Great. So if anybody wants to come up to the podium, there's a button, just push. Feel free to come up. Talk to us about these job descriptions.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of issues. We've been going through this for, according to my records, about 16 years now, way before probably anybody in this room was here. It's been approached again and again and again and again and again and again. I've rewritten and redone and worked with my crew so many times. I'm really sick of looking at it. Every time it comes forward, it gets placed in one committee or another, and then it sits, and then it fizzles, and then it goes away, and we kind of become complacent because we get tired of fighting, and so we drop it, and then it comes up again. Something happens with something. We either can't hire, because I've been involved with the hiring process for a number of years, and I can tell you it's not easy. We can't find applicants. when we do find one that we really get excited about that's highly qualified and will bring something to our program, they turn it down the minute we show them the pay scale. They're being pulled now. I don't know if you know, we've lost 4 people to Calcasieu Parish 2 years ago. Calcasieu went through the same thing as us. They couldn't find interpreters, so they contracted them out. They surpassed the agency that we use for subs, which in Lafayette is the Deaf Action Center. We were paying the Deaf Action Center $50 an hour per interpreter. We were using at least 2 a year for a number of years, which was racking us bills in the 100-something thousands. Mr. Thibodeaux can testify to. So Calcasieu decided to go around the agency, and they paid the interpreters themselves $50 an hour, or 45, Damien? $45 an hour, 10 hours a day to travel to Calcasieu. And so we lost 4 people in 1 year. We ran ads multiple times, couldn't find anybody highly qualified. We have lots of people in this community that are interested in learning sign language, which is wonderful, but that doesn't make them interpreter by far. I learned that the hard way as a mom who had a child that was deaf, diagnosed at 1. By 9, I was way behind him and came into the system and thought, I'm an interpreter, because I've been interpreting for and signing for 9 years, 8 years, and I was I was so wrong. And I've learned in the 23 years what it takes to become a skilled interpreter. And it's a lot. It's not just, it's just a lot. It's a lot of studying. It's a lot of courses. It's a lot of classes. It's a lot of practice. So currently we are understaffed. We still need another interpreter. We have yet to find. We ran ads, like I said, multiple times. We eventually hired people in the role of a captionist, and we train and we mentor and we do all of that in-house. We have, again, proposed these job descriptions. We've had the job descriptions completed for a number of years. In 2015, Mr. Leininger was the HR director, and we reached out again. And Mr. Leininger was very proactive he was really supportive. He told us that he had looked at all the job descriptions and all the pay scales, and he found them all outdated. And he wanted to start from the bottom and work his way up. So he said what he could do for us was put us all on the same pay scale, which he did. Pay scale 6. We are all on the same pay scale. Certified, not certified. It doesn't matter what the skill level is. We are all on the same pay scale. And that's a problem. It doesn't encourage growth. It doesn't encourage us to pursue any kind of further education or improve ours. It really doesn't. We're stuck, and we've been stuck for a long time now. We accepted that in 2015 because it was a quick fix, with the idea that we were going to be addressing the job descriptions. He had convinced us, because I'll be honest, for a long time we fought for more than one job description. However, his point was, and after listening to it, made a lot of sense. We have lots of teachers in this parish, and we have lots of teachers with all different types of degrees, from non-certified teachers who are brought in with whatever it's called now, a T certificate, they work on it, to PhDs, and they're all in one job description because they all do the same job. And so we don't feel the need for 4 job descriptions. We think one educational interpreter job description would cover. We would also, however, like a lead interpreter job description. I have been a lead interpreter in this parish for 17 years without a job description. I know there's probably some things that have been said that we aren't needed. It's a wasted job. It had to be a reason for it to develop. I mean, back 30 years ago when Ms. Baldwin was the teacher, she was basically the teacher deaf ed teacher / lead interpreter. She did everything, but back then we had how many interpreters? 3? 2, sorry. And how many kids? Our program is the biggest in the state, by far. Calcasieu even is half of our size. So we need, and we've always led the way, always, I promise you. I get phone calls all the time from as far as Shreveport, everywhere. They're always calling to look at our program, to see what we've got and why we're so successful. So it's not broke. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to update job descriptions. In 2015, that did not happen. Also, we need to attract new people. Calcasieu's bringing them all. They get calls from the Lamar University in Texas from interpreters all the time because of their pay scale. They're pulling in our people because of their pay scale. We've got to do something about that too for our kids. Our kids are not getting the service they deserve. We have the job descriptions. They're created. We want Calcasieu's pay scale. It's simple. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's been done.
Do you know what that pay scale is, or can you share that with us?
Yes, sir.
And I'm looking at the agenda item. There's several different job descriptions, but you're saying you only need the educational classroom interpreter, and I don't see one for lead interpreter.
No, it wasn't created.
Okay.
Just like the pay scale was never created.
So you're asking, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You can go ahead. So I did have an opportunity, while you're looking, I did have an opportunity to attend the Lafayette High School, I think it's called the Express Fest this year. Fantastic. My daughter is learning sign language at UL and asked me to go, and what an experience. It was quite an experience. Highly recommend it. Yes, ma'am.
So, Ms. Welsh, why don't you let those gentlemen find what you're looking for, and I'll have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind, if you want to come to the mic. All right. So you mentioned that some of you are certified and some are non-certified. So what certification are you talking about? A teacher certification, or?
No, ma'am. In the state of Louisiana, the EIPA, the Educational Interpreter Performance Assessment, is what the state of Louisiana recognizes. It was created back in 2005. We piloted the program, actually. I'll give us a little boost for that.
Okay.
In 2002, I think the state adopted it. Right.
All right. So,
State certification.
so some of you have state certification and
Yes,
some do
ma'am.
not. Okay.
Almost
so,
all of us have state certification,
Okay.
except for the new hires.
All right. Now the proposed
correct.
policies, the four or some of the four mention a different certification. It's a national certification.
Correct.
And what is that?
The national certification is through RID, which is the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. It's a national association that focuses mostly on community interpreters. However, a few years ago, I think back in 2016, they started recognizing educational interpreters under their umbrella. What they did with that, however, is they did not create a test. They didn't create a performance, a written test or a performance. They took the EIPA, which is what we already take, and accepted it as a level 4 or above. It's got a grading scale of 1 and all the way to 5 on the EIPA, 5 being the best and 1 being the worst.
Do any other Louisiana districts require their interpreters to have the national
No,
certification?
ma'am. It's usually an and/or kind of thing. Like they'll recognize it because, of course, it means that you've had some qualifications, you've had some skills, you've had some practice in the community. But the community interpreting and educational interpreting are two totally different fields.
Okay. And then one of the other issues that we've talked about, and you'll have to educate us somewhat, is the difference between ASL and English.
Yes, ma'am.
If you can explain that to
There he is.
the board members.
I'll let Chad
and-
do that.
Okay.
Mr. Gage.
And I guess part of my question is I understand that there's some proponents for nothing but English, and there's some proponents for nothing but ASL, and there's some proponents for some of each because of particular reasons.
Correct. My name's Chad Gage. I'm the special education supervisor over the Deaf Ed program. I just inherited it about a year ago when my partner retired, so I'm trying to learn a lot and didn't realize how much was entailed in that. But ASL is more the natural language that the deaf speak. We use C, which kind of falls under manually coded English, or we have used C mainly before I've kind of come on, which I guess the best way I could explain it, I know we have a couple of people out here. C teaches them the correct English, kind of like we're saying he would go to the store. ASL is more of a visual store he go. So it's quicker. The reason why we've always kind of used C was, of course, we're educating with all the standardized tests and with all the, you know, the education part of it, we went with C. Since I've kind of taken over, I have been adamant that we're going to follow what the IEP dictates. On an IEP, there's what they call a communication plan. It's a 7-page plan that usually the speech pathologist and the deaf ed teacher go through. And we want to be able to give the kids their need. So if a parent is requesting ASL outright, and that's what we agree on through the IEP team, and we put that on the legal document, the IEP, that's what we're going to give them. If the parent wants C, we'll give them that. If they want kind of a pigeon, kind of an in-between, we'll give them that. I'm trying to expand the program, and guys, y'all got to understand this program is kind of the lighthouse in the state. We've had kids go to Harvard. We've had kids, you know, on Broadway. We've had kids graduate, multiple degrees. What we're trying now, what I'm trying to do as, and not I am, but as a department, is we're trying to just expand it a little bit and update it a little bit to offer those things. Most of our interpreters took the EIPA in C, or manually coded English. I'm now trying to say, let's see if you feel comfortable, if we get some new people in, to let them try to take it and get certified through the ASL portion of it. So that'll give us that aspect to be able to offer it. I will tell you that my understanding is the Louisiana School of Deaf has always done ASL, and their grade has really not been very well at F school. They're looking at doing a little bit more of an English model. You know, it's kind of a battle, ASL English. I'm in the middle. Whatever the kid needs, we're going to give it to them through the IEP, and that's what's going to dictate our, you know, what we're going to use. I also want to say a couple of things about the interpreters. These interpreters are service providers on an IEP. They have minutes on an IEP, like a speech pathologist, like an occupational therapist, a physical therapist. They are on an IEP like those people. So legally, we have to offer those services. This is the hardest group of people, hardest working group of people I've been around since I've taken over. You know, they go, really, they're supposed to sign for 45 minutes. They could get what they call repetitive motion injuries, okay? We have some that stay in middle school 90 minutes, signing up there from start to finish. So they're going beyond what really they should be. Without complaint, you know, they work hard. They're learning C-print. They're adding all these different things we're expecting of them. But there's no difference when it comes to Missy, who could have a degree, who could be a 4.0, who could be, you know, the Queen Sign Language, have a doctorate in deaf ed, a doctorate in interpreting, and someone who comes in and just barely gets certified. They're on the same pay scale. So I think that's where they're coming from when you start looking at the pay scales. I will address the lead. I went to Calcasieu Parish, and I spoke with Miss Krista Folks, who's their supervisor over there. They don't have, well, of course they have the size, but they don't have the lead. And when people are sick or people don't show up, those kids will go on service for a day or two. That's what she told us. Missy came with me. We don't do that. We have our leads to make sure we're getting substitutes, to make sure we're rearranging schedules, to make sure our kids are getting what they need. Some of the other services our leads do, they come a couple of weeks before school. They sit down with the deaf ed teacher and the counselors, and they make sure every one of our kids are scheduled, to make sure she can schedule the kid in the class along with the interpreters. Our leads attend the IEPs to make sure that legally the IEP is compliant and they understand what services the child needs. I personally, and this is coming from me, and I understand, you know, there's questions about leads. I couldn't do it without leads. I couldn't do it because I have 5 other schools, and I'm not just a deaf ed. I have all the programs, autism, all the way up to, you know, to a resource. I just kind of wanted to speak out that they really are hard working, and this has been a 16-year fight for them. And, you know, I would love if you guys consider what they're asking.
No.
Ms. Morris?
Yeah, Mr. Gage, have you had the opportunity to compare the job descriptions that the interpreters have? I don't know who prepared them, and then the 4 that are being proposed.
Yes,
and
I have.
I mean, what are your thoughts or comments and
On the new ones, I'm really, be honest, I'm not sure what some of these jobs are. Coordinator for deaf and hard of hearing, support grade 8, bachelor's degree in deaf ed, sign language interpreting or related area of study, holds a national certification as a sign language interpreter. I don't know, is that what we're looking at for our leads, or? Okay, so that would be to replace the lead teachers. So I think right there we would lose our 3 leads.
And Ms. Thibodeaux, would this coordinator position be at the same pay scale as the lead currently, or it's a higher? Okay, so why is it called a coordinator rather than a lead? I mean, what's the difference? Why change the job title? If it's taken the place,
we just looked at the duties, and we just reviewed it. Lots of us were in a room and evaluated and looked. We just researched it. We called Calcasieu, and we knew it would be nice to have somebody that would coordinate the program and help. And we weren't saying there would only be one. That was one question. You could have more than one if we needed more, but we thought that would be a good title for it at that pay scale to have a coordinator.
And where did you pull the qualifications from? The bachelor's degree and the national certification, which someone told me, and I'm not sure, that there may be a moratorium on the national certification, so it's not even a currently good national certification. So my concern is this is such a specialized area. There's obviously not enough to go around in the state for all the available jobs. So if we make it so restrictive that we have no one who qualifies for the position, that puts us in a really bad spot, doesn't it? So
we would have
I'm
to
just
come
a little
back
worried.
to you.
Yeah, so, and then the bachelor's degree, I mean, do we have some interpreters that currently work for us that have a bachelor's degree in deaf education?
We do.
So currently we have nobody who would qualify for this position within our system.
We have 3 that have bachelor's degrees, is what I was told. I'm not sure then deaf ed. Okay. But I was told that we might could attract some other people as well with that qualification. I was told that.
So what if you can't? The coordinator or lead position will stay empty until you're able to find someone?
If we couldn't, we could come back to you and change the job description at that time. If we couldn't.
Or we could maybe account for that scenario on the front end, right? So
well, we were hoping that we would find somebody that would qualify for the position.
Okay. And then
or maybe we really talked about having 2 people.
Was it this job description or one of the others that said they needed to get a bachelor's degree within 3 years? It was this job description?
Well, you would go in, or either you could get obtain your national certification. You would go in on an ancillary certificate, and we would give you time.
Which job description required them to get a bachelor's degree within 3 years?
Well, I have the regular classroom job description, and so that's where you would come in on an ancillary, qualifying for an ancillary, and then after that they would give you 3 years to move into the professional interpreter position. And actually we even did one for, in case someone did not qualify for an ancillary, they could come in as a C-print captionist, because we've had people that we have started in our district that are doing C-print.
And what is C-print?
It's more like dictation type, and that's probably, I'm not an expert in this field, so I didn't, but it's more computerized electronic type of transcription.
It's like closed caption. Typically what we've been doing is a C-print captionist will sit next to a student like I am and type everything that they're saying in the class so the student could read it. Now we're starting to use some technology where they could put a little mini iPad in front of them and the captionist sits in the back of the room and types and they could read what goes on. The tough part about the C-print captionist is, according to their criteria, for every hour they type, they should have an hour of editing. Because once they type a whole class, they then have to go back and edit all names out for edit all the, the non-important stuff that goes on in the classroom.
So I'm going to try to summarize where I think we are. The interpreter group has 2 primary draft job descriptions that you would like to push forward, but staff has come up with 4 job descriptions as well that you would like to push forward as a solution. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
Second, the interpreter group has proposed us adopting something similar to the Calcasieu Parish pay scale with steps and 4 different categories. My question on this is, because you've come up with 2 job descriptions, are you saying we would adopt something like this but with 2 columns instead of 4 columns? There would still be 4
We have
columns.
one job description in Calcasieu Parish that all the interpreters fit on, depending on their skills.
And those are categorized by the EIPA scores,
Yes, sir. And then
or
the last one
the last one is EIPA and bachelor's.
Correct.
Okay. But do we have a recommendation from staff or on this yet, on pay scales yet?
Yes, we did. When you look at the job descriptions, you start out, if you came in as C-print captionist, started out on a pay grade 5, because to make it fit within our pay scale that the LPSS has is what we were trying to do. And then so if you move up in your classroom interpreter with an ancillary certificate, you would go to a pay grade 6. And if you became nationally certified or had a bachelor's degree, you would move into a pay grade 7. And then the coordinator, someone within the coordinator position would move up to a pay grade 8. So that's the way we had done it.
So I'm going to ask a question. We're not going to solve this tonight. This committee is not going to sort through these 6 different job descriptions tonight, nor the pay scale. That's just not going to happen. But what we can do is direct Dr. Aguilar's staff to work together, the combined group, your representatives and HR, to come to us with a mutually agreeable recommendation for job descriptions and pay scale by the January 7th meeting. Is that fair? All right. Just everybody kind of, and then we can move forward from there unless there's anything else you guys want to add to that discussion.
I did want to add one thing. I was told the last meeting to whatever we did to follow the process of the school system, follow the process. So we were planning to introduce this, go through the reclass system, go through the reclass committee, and through the budget process is really how we wanted to handle it. We could still come to you with a mutual agreement job description, but it was going to be for the budget for next year and go through the reclass committee.
I think this is nothing happens quickly. So I think that if you can come to the board with an adopted job description or a mutually agreeable job description by the next board meeting, okay. The vote will probably be to implement it for the next budget year. That would be my guess. So I don't think we need to vote on this unless you guys think we need. Ms. Morris?
No, I don't think we need to vote on it. I guess my thoughts are, I'm not sure if there's any practical reason for having more job descriptions rather than fewer. It seems like it's going to be simpler to keep them narrowed down. That's one. Two, I'm real concerned about the idea that we may be imposing some required qualifications that one, none of our interpreters currently meet with the bachelor's degree in deaf ed. And then two, I really would like to have a lot more information about the national certification. If there's a moratorium or if it's not something required in the state of Louisiana, I don't understand why I don't know why we would even consider imposing that as a requirement on our interpreters, especially when it's such a difficult position to fill. This is not one you can just bring in and train somebody off the street. This is something that takes years and years and years of training. And even Mr. Konezik's daughter is learning sign language now, but it's going to take her a very long time to become fluent enough to be an interpreter in a live, active classroom setting with everything that goes on in there. So I guess my inclination is to keep it simpler. Everybody knows the KISS principle. Just to kind of simplify the process and to continue providing the services that we need to provide. And of course the IEPs, I mean, that's regulated by federal guidelines. So if an IEP says that it's ASL versus C, then we certainly need to be able to provide those services as well. So anyway, so those are my thoughts on that. And then my second thought is part of the frustration that's been expressed to me is that this group of interpreters have felt left out of the process of the new proposed job descriptions. And so I know Mr. Gage is here and everyone's here, and there's an assurance that when you come back to us, y'all are going to all work together. So I hope that y'all are able to come to a meeting of the minds because this is such an important service. We are the hub for this community. How many parishes do we serve?
We serve Vermilion, St. Martin, now we serve Evangeline and Acadia. We serve 4. And
plus Lafayette as well.
And I get calls probably every month from Iberia or some other surrounding schools of trying to get their kid, the child here. I have the registry about the moratorium if you would like it, Ms. Morris. And I'd also like to say, just because I like supporting our people, that we have 2 deaf ed teachers in here and how phenomenal they are for our kids, because these are the people that are their ears and their communication, and those kids would not graduate without all of you guys. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. I recognize what a difficult job it is, and that it is quite different. So I'm confident we're going to be able to get through this to everyone's satisfaction.
All right, Dr. Aguilar, if you could come back to us in January with some recommendations.
Absolutely.
All right.
And by the way, this has been going on for 16 long years. It's time to get this thing settled. Right. What I heard was mutually agreeable job descriptions and a salary recommendation. I'm committed to try to find that common ground so that we can get this thing resolved.
Thank you.
Mr. President, can I make some comment?
Yes.
Okay. Marcus Thomas with the LAE. You'll be happy as board president to know that the salary schedule that is proposed to be adopted from Calcasieu will not cost the board any general fund money. They all come from federal funds. One thing about the salary scale that was not mentioned is that the years of experience are not accounted for, with they all being on the same pay scale. And we had several meetings before, and one thing that came from the meeting was that overwhelmingly a majority agreed that the system we have here is working because we have 3 lead interpreters. There's one for elementary, there's one for middle, and there's one for high. And these ladies have been working tirelessly and getting a $250 stipend per month for their duties as a lead interpreter, and that accounts for a lot of the success of the interpreter program, with us having 3 as opposed to 2 or 1. So people that's been in the interpreter business for a while all say that having 3 has a lot to do with the success of the program and the hard work of all employees here that you see today. All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Morris.
And just to follow up on that, Ms. Trosclair, correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of our earlier conversations was that you thought that a lead interpreter was a necessity, so that would be your preference to have a lead.
That's correct, and that's actually, I'm sorry, that was our plan. It was changed to a coordinator, but it was still to have one at the elementary, middle, and high schools, yes.
Okay.
And we currently don't have an official lead interpreter coordinator. That was part of the reason that job description was created.
Okay. If I can just jump back very briefly on one of the prior agenda items, I understand that the policies, the way that they're grouped on the website, are by pay grade. So unless you know what a particular job description's pay grade is, you can't find it. So seems like it should be a relatively simple IT matter to classify them or to have a search. So you can say interpreter and you know where to go without knowing what their pay grade is.
We'll take a look at that. I've never gone to that site to
I didn't know it
look
was
for a
on
job
there.
description, so we'll look at that and try to make it user-friendly.
Yes, thank you.
All right, well, that concludes the business tonight. This meeting's adjourned.